are as far as what your specialty is, and to learn as much about other things as you possibly can. Right after I graduated from college, I went to another school over the summer to take a particular course that I was interested in by a noted authority in that subject, a course that was not offered at my school, and which I felt I would need. And it was a graduate course, and most of the people who were in my class were graduate students who were graduates of that institution. I was one of the very few outsiders from another place. And this particular professor, although this was a theory course, he also conducted one of their ensembles, which specialized in earlier music. And there was one person in the class who had been a voice major and had been in his group already for about 5 years or so. And at one time in the class, the person said, well, I'm only interested in vocal music, and that's really all I know about. And the professor lit into him, I mean, just slaughtered him right there. And I thought, wow, these people have been together for 5 years now. You'd think there would be a little bit better relationship between them. So I was, shocked and paralyzed like everybody else in the class at the time. But on reflection, in trying to apply it to myself, I thought, yes, that's exactly right. I need to get out of just the little orbit I'm in, and I need to get to know a whole bunch more stuff, because I'm only into a fraction of what there is. And I'll never be much if I don't broaden my knowledge and deepen my knowledge as well of other things which I heretofore hadn't been that interested in. But one of the things that I've really learned is that stuff you don't know about, of course you're not interested in it. You don't know anything about it. You don't have any appreciation of the genius behind it. You don't. It's unknown to you. It's not part of your stream of consciousness. And the more I found that the more you know about something, the more you can and actually tend to like it a little bit, because they're cool things that you just didn't know about before, that you look at as, hey, that's terrific. Wish I'd known about it earlier. And so I've always tried to encourage everybody around me to do that, because some of the things which we encounter in this class, particularly in listed type stuff, yes, it's not something that you deal with all the time. It's not. But if you'll just continue to deal with it, then some of these things will be like your old friends someday. And you'll not want to imagine yourself without these old friends, because they have become quite dear to you and do you a lot of intellectual and artistic good in the meantime. One of the things people did during the time that I was in college was that when they were interested in a particular work by a composer, they listened to several recordings of the same piece, performed by different people, and tried to appreciate what the differences were between them, and gain some extra interpretive perspective like that. I don't think people do that very much anymore. You do have to be careful with that, because if you're preparing one of those pieces, then if the first thing you do is listen to somebody's performance of it, what has that done to your interpretation of the work? Yes, it's really proscribed it into a much smaller interpretive world, because subconsciously you look at that interpretation as somewhat authoritative, and that maybe you should do it the same way. So after a certain point, I just stopped doing that. When I picked up a new piece that I was going to be involved in a performance of, then I purposely avoided listening to the piece until after I had performed it myself with my own interpretation, insofar as the people involved in it were capable of doing that. And it was only then, at a later time, once it had really gelled, that I'd go and listen to one or two other people and see how they thought about it in comparison to the way I had thought about it. And so sometimes I would think, well, I think I really like mine better. But in other cases, it was like, then, oh, yeah, that's really interesting. I should try that out sometime. But this way you come out a winner. Either way, being exposed to other interpretations of exactly the same thing. Now, there was a while where people were only interested in the sound quality. And so people started to look upon various labels, as superior in their engineering and stuff like that. That was all very well, but my ear just wasn't good enough for that, and my equipment wasn't good enough for it either. There was a long time that I played LPs in the time when we had LPs on a little thing about this deep and about this wide, and the LP hung over all the sides, and the little box was its own speaker, and that was just all I had. But I was able to learn a lot of music on that little thing, even though the sound quality was really crappy. So it's great if you have an ear that's attuned to tiny little things like that. But at the same time, that shouldn't be number one, I think, of what you're listening to. You're listening to the nuances of whether the person interpreting it has captured what you believe the composer's intention is. So this was the reason why you had the Beethoven Sonata played on a piano from close to the time when Beethoven composed that piece. And part of that is to make the point that the piano at that time was not really capable of having that piece played on it, because it doesn't sound very good. It sounds like it's going to collapse in a pile of sticks just any minute now, because Beethoven's writing thunderous stuff, and the instrument just can't do it. So it was a result of some things like that that helped piano builders have the imagination and the impetus to start building better instruments, so that now, today, we have an instrument like this, which Beethoven would have had an orgasm over, because he just was never able to hear any kind of performance on an adequate instrument, no matter the builder, no matter the cost. That in his mind, the music was just way beyond that. So we hear stuff all the time on modern instruments, and I think it's good to have the perspective of what it must have sounded like back then and appreciate how inadequate the instrument really was. You can actually buy instruments like that now. You can commission people to build them, or if you're good enough at that sort of thing, you can get the kits and actually build them yourself. For a pretty reasonable price, you could build a Stein piano probably for $10,000, a fraction of what an automobile would cost, except the Stein piano would last your entire lifetime, and a car only lasts a few years, and it's gone to the junkyard. So there are people who are interested in that and do it. But you wouldn't want to play anything by Brahms or Lizt on it, because it'd be awful.
Have you played on one of those?
I've not played on a Stein piano. I do actually have a harpsichord, though, so I have played on that. And one time in a summer recital, I demonstrated that a piece by Mozart sounds kind of okay on a harpsichord, and a piece by Beethoven does not, by playing the same thing on the instruments side by side. and being able to feel the revulsion in the audience, like, God, that's terrible, because the instrument was just no longer right for it anymore. And it was obvious, very, very obvious at the time. So there's an interesting little experiment. There is an elementary music teacher in McAllen. His name is Oscar Togley, and he was in this class years ago, and he actually owns a clavichord, which he saved up and purchased, and he brought it to class and showed us what it looked like and what it sounded like, and it was quite a revelation to us at the time, because instruments like that are unknown to us. But he's really into that kind of thing, so he invested in it. All right, we were into symphonies and specifically program music last time. And we mentioned Symphonie Fantastique by Berlioz, and we mentioned Lizt a little bit. And for Lizt, in addition to Le Prélude, which was a programmatic piece by him at the time, in addition to his symphonic poems, there are two pieces that we could really class as symphonies. One of them is nicknamed the Faust Symphony, and the other one is nicknamed the Dante Symphony. The programmatic subject matter would be obvious from both the titles. And as symphonies, they're just as programmatic as the symphonic poems. What's going to be the difference then between a symphony and a symphonic poem? They're both for orchestra. Yes, that's right. A symphony is a multi-movement piece, and we said a symphonic poem is a single movement piece. Okay, so we shouldn't forget that. The three movements of the Faust Symphony have subtitles. The first one is Faust. The second one is Gretchen. And the third movement is Mephistopheles. So, of course, these are the main characters in the Faust legend. The scheme of the movements is somewhat standard. The first movement's an allegro, it's in sonata form. The second movement is the slow one, andante, it's in 3 parts. And the last movement is a fast one, scherzo, it's in 3 parts also. Well, the character of the themes sort of fits the persona of those characters that are, in fact, the subtitles and the characters in the Faust story. In a nutshell, what's the Faust story? Deal with the devil, that's right. And then has to pay the consequences after he's enjoyed the benefits.
Is it the same story as the opera Faust?
No, actually that's a little bit different, but of course in opera they just change things, so that the audience will be pleased about something. So anyway, the Mephistopheles theme sounds very sinister, kind of the way Berlioz had done in The Witch's Sabbath. And that's only 3 movements, so at a later time, Liszt actually added a 4th movement so that it does resemble the 4-movement scheme of a more traditional symphony. All right, well, the themes do fit the characters, and they're actually interchangeable among all the movements. But we mentioned something last time that got to be standard procedure for a romantic composer, and what did we call that? Where a theme travels through all the movements. Well, no, that was Berlioz's specific one that represented his beloved, something more than just itself.
The
cyclical technique. That's right. The cyclical technique. That's a word that we want to become very, very familiar with in the Romantic period. Okay, well, this added movement actually also includes men's chorus and tenor solo. But where do you think that idea came from? Beethoven Ninth, that's right. The Dante Symphony actually started out as two movements. Those are entitled Inferno and Purgatory. And then at a later time, he appended a final movement. But this time, it included women's chorus along with the orchestra, and it used the text of the Magnificat. The Magnificat is a text that is for about the second Sunday in Advent, something like that. My soul doth magnify the Lord, and my spirit hath rejoiced in God my Savior. That's Mary's prayer. All right, well, Brahms, only 4 symphonies, but they're big and long. They are the true successors of Beethoven. As we said, he felt that he'd been called to this position, and it haunted him for years. Finally, brought himself to publish his first symphony at age 43. Brahms is a very conservative romantic composer. His works have many classical tendencies. They do have the customary design of 4 movements. They are not joined together, however. They are 4 separate movements in the traditional way. Each of the movements has a form that would be very recognizably close to the classical patterns. Brahms' symphonies have lots of counterpoint in them, a lot of motivic development after the fashion of Beethoven. And the symphonies of Brahms are totally absolute music. Brahms does not write program music. Well, what are the romantic qualities then if he's a romantic composer? Well, lyrical melody, long phrases, romantic key relationships, romantic harmony. There is one additional feature of Brahms which helps you know by ear who it must be. And that is that there is a rich, thick, dark tone quality. Now, how does he achieve this? Well, let's assume a reduction into a piano scale. Treble staff, bass staff. So, for most composers, when they assign the notes as to who's going to play them, they're kind of spread out, and the ones that are the closest ones together, those tend to be up in the upper instruments. More space between notes in the lower instruments. Brahms is different. He has more notes packed down low. That's what gives it that thick, dark sound quality to it. Okay? So, if you know well one orchestral work by Brahms, chances are, when somebody just plays you another one and says, who do you think this composer is? In half a minute or so, you can just tell that rich, thick, dark texture and tone quality that leads you to believe this is probably Brahms. Test yourself out sometime, getting to know one by Brahms, and then have somebody try to trick you with another one and say it's Brahms or it's not Brahms, you know. And chances are you'll be able to get it right. And don't discount that, because sometime if you were taking your general exams for your doctoral degree. That's the kind of stuff they're going to throw at you. Who do you think this is and why? Remember, one of my tests was committee sitting around the table, and one person brought in a big stack of music books, and each one of them opened them up. Left page, right page. Who do you think's the composer and why? 20 examples like that. No, usually not. It could happen, I suppose, but they probably let you know it's going to. Yeah. Well, that's a pretty terrifying sounding thing. You know, I mean, you only get 2 pages, the left page and the right page. But if you've paid attention to trying to pigeonhole exactly how they do things in each period, then supposedly it's going to be 2 pages that really have some clues. And it seemed to me one of the hardest ones was a real tall score. I mean, lots and lots of parts. So I looked at it and I thought, well, all right, lots of brass here, a ferocious horn part with really high notes, extreme dynamics and stuff like that. So I said, it's post-romantic and I think it's Strauss. And sure enough, that was right. But it was clues. You know, it's you know, what's there? What does this represent as far as how they write stuff? So this is one of the reasons why we give you the written stuff and we give you the oral stuff in classes like this to get you started on that road. Now, when you get to that position, of course, they understand you can't know everything. They still figure that you need to be an expert in your subject area, but you need to have a good conversational knowledge in a lot of accessory areas. It's not like you have to get everything right. And of course, in some situation like that, it doesn't matter if you guess the wrong composer or not. If you guess one that's close, and the reasons why you give support all of that, then that's really a right answer. And actually, I had a course like that. It was, in fact, symphonic literature, which we had to learn 60 full symphonies in one semester. That's a lot of music. And on every test, there were 2 parts to the test. One was the listening test, like what you had today, except it's only symphonies. And the other one was there were 2 unknowns, each one movement played twice, and a 10-question guide, and you were supposed to answer each of those questions based upon what you hear, and number 10 was, who is this? It was damned hard. But it's the kind of thing that you have to do at a high-powered school to come out with a high-powered education. So we're starting you off on the road to that. It's not to make you miserable. It's to get you going on that kind of expertise. True, we just scratched the surface, but you got to start somewhere. You know, you got to start somewhere. This is where we start. All right, let's go with Brahms a little bit here. Symphony number 1, C minor, 4 movements. The classical scheme, fast, slow, medium, fast. And the key scheme from one movement to the next is very romantic. The first movement, of course, is in C minor. The second movement is in E major. So from 3 flats to 4 sharps. A very distantly related key. Third related, and therefore chromatic third relation between those keys. All right? Now, the third movement is in A flat major. Now, what about the relationship in sound between E major and A flat major? What do they sound like? They sound like they're third related also. That's right. And the fourth movement, again, C minor, but ending in C major. And where do you think he got that idea?
Beethoven?
The Beethoven Fifth, that's right, in which the fourth movement goes to C major. All right, now notice that the E major is a major third above tonic, and the A flat major is a major third below tonic. So there's a kind of an architectural tonal balance there that is a very classical idea. The range of theme one in the first movement, extremely wide. Fragments of the introduction appear in the other movements. So a slight bit of cyclicality in it. Symphony number 4 is in E minor. Very romantic. There's no introduction. The theme begins immediately with the first note. And just like we said with Beethoven and that theme that was all steps, this one, here's E minor. That's kind of unusual, but very memorable. It's not hard to remember that theme, not hard at all. Funny story. When Dr. B and I were just starting to sort of see each other, she had a project one summer. She was going to learn the Brahms Symphonies. And so she started with number 4, this E minor symphony. However, she didn't have any score or anything like that, so in her cheap equipment, she put it on and learned it thoroughly. The turntable was a little fast. She conceived of it in F minor, because she has perfect pitch. To her, it was an F minor symphony. And so when she heard it in E minor, it was devastating. Because keys have characters. Keys have colors, especially to somebody with perfect pitch. So she was just, shocked out of her mind. To me, it didn't make any difference. It sounded the same. E minor, F minor, it's close. It's all right. The fourth movement of this E minor symphony is a pretty famous one. And the reason is because it is based upon a pattern, a harmonic pattern, a chaconne, if you will. That's a term that we had in the Baroque period, and we said it's different from a passacaglia, because a passacaglia was a melodic pattern, whereas a chaconne is a harmonic pattern. So it's a pattern and 32 variations over that harmonic pattern. And Brahms has you so absorbed with the foreground materials that a lot of people listen for a long time to that movement and never realize that it's just a repeated harmonic pattern 32 more times. Occasionally it's like, oh yes, I've heard this material before, but it bypasses them. That in fact it's just over and over and over and over and over again 32 times on the same harmonic pattern. That takes a little genius. Bruckner, B-R-U-C-K-N-E-R. Bruckner is a mixture of conservative and progressive characteristics, so I think we, on balance, will put him middle of the road. Bruckner was very picky about his compositions, and he revised some of them so many times that actually a number of Bruckner's compositions exist in several versions, and they're all his. Never satisfied. The symphonies of Bruckner are not especially programmatic. They do have the usual 4 movements. Bruckner was intensely religious, and so his symphonies have a very serious tone to them. And in the final movements, there are often chorale-like passages that are played by the brass. And so it has a very somber religious tinge to it. Now, we attach a little bit of religiosity to the symphonies of Bruckner for another reason as well. And that is that he wrote quite a few large-scale mass settings. And sometimes in his symphonies, he borrows themes from his own masses. Well, we know where they are in the masses, and we know what the words are in the masses. And so we wonder if maybe he's not thinking of that same religious passage during that passage of a symphony. In a Bruckner symphony, the orchestra is very large, and the movements are very long. Bruckner was, in fact, an organist, and so there are some passages that seem to have families of instruments sort of playing one on top of another against each other, kind of like pulling out a whole bunch of stops on an organ, with 2 manuals going at the same time, as if he sort of conceived the sound this way and fleshes it out for orchestra, just piling up big blocks of sound that sound like an organist, adding all of these combinations. And a lot of places, loud and exciting. In Symphony number 8, in the finale, he not only recalls fragments of themes from the previous 3 movements, but he has them all played at the same time. So it's a pretty complicated finish, a great big melange of sounds. The slow movements, not surprisingly, are very devout and solemn sounding. Again, that religious tinge to the sound of an otherwise non-sacred work. All right. I'm figuring that next week we might have interviews during this class where applicants will teach the classes, but we don't have the travel set up yet as far as I know, so it's not a done deal. I'm going to go ahead and give you the study guide for exam number 2, and we'll have to sort of play it by ear a little bit as when we actually take it. But in any case, you'll have plenty of time on it, so do get started, but you don't really have to feel rushed.
The earliest one.
Well, it's scheduled for Monday, but that's way too soon because I was supposed to give it to you Monday. I'm just morally certain that at least one day next week is going to be taken with an applicant, so probably we're going to shoot for March 4th. That would be a week from next Monday. That's the better part of 2 weeks. So, like I say, if they spring another one on us, we'll just bump it back. But